am delighted to welcome both people in the room and people online to the official launch of the Scottish Privy Council project website. I'm not going to say very much, but one thing I would like to say before I start, before everything else starts, before the main acts come in, is a few words of tribute and thanks, in a sense. The most important words in that regard that I have to say are for Alastair, because if it were not for Alastair's initiative, drive, enthusiasm, and persistence, this would never have got off the ground. It would never have been completed. The confidence in the viability of this project right from the beginning was all Alastair's. The impetus behind putting it together was all Alastair's. Allan and I chipped in, I think, and I hope helped, but really it couldn't have been done without Alastair, and I think it's just a tremendous effort that he's put in and a great achievement, and I'm really grateful to Alastair, and I think Allan is and the rest of the project team are, for the amount of effort and drive that has gone into this on his part. So I think that's the main thing that I really want to say before I move on to the emceeing of the rest of this afternoon's business. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce one of the mentors of the project. I think was involved in talking to Alastair about it early on and was one of our referees for the Leverhulme bid. And perhaps the sub-inspiration of it all from back in the days of the Parliament project, which is sort of where this all began in a sense, when Alastair and Keith and I worked together in St Andrews all those years ago. And I'm delighted to say that Keith Brown has agreed to come and say a few words to us to introduce the evening.
Okay, so thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be back. This is the first time I've been invited to talk at Stirling University in almost 30 years. So I don't know who I insulted back in the day, but it is good to be here. Alastair asked me if I'd do this because he said if I didn't, he would drone on. And I thought, you have to be spared that, because he has been known to occasionally drone on. I won't talk too long, as you can probably hear. I'm struggling a bit. My vocal cords have been quite seriously damaged, so talking these days doesn't come as easily as it used to. Anyway, Scotland's pretty well served by the number of printed records we have. We're really quite fortunate, particularly for what you might call the building blocks and the more important institutional type of records that there are. And it's probably not as fashionable to say it these days, but there's a hierarchy of records. Parliament Privy Council records do matter more than Curos Borough Council records, etc. So there are certain records that really are foundational to doing the sort of work that most of us do. And all Scottish historians owe an enormous debt to previous generations of people who've done this. John Knox and Calderwood and Thompson and Burton and Bain and P.H. Brown and all these people, Pitcairn, etc. We all sort of stand on their shoulders and are highly dependent on the work that they have previously done for us. And again, it's becoming a little fashionable these days to say, oh, you need to go back to the manuscripts, you need to go back to the manuscripts. You don't. Most of the printed records are damn good. And if you think about it in terms of return on investment, returning to the manuscripts is a huge amount of effort, often for not very much that you get out of it. Sometimes that is not true, but on the whole, the records that are there that are printed are pretty good ones too. So to be adding to that is really important. It was alluded to earlier, I think already. The RPS team used to kick around the idea of, oh, imagine if we could digitise all of Scotland's history. Wouldn't it be wonderful? And it was all connected up. And we sort of got carried away occasionally as we were down there in Mabel's eating burgers and drinking pints, not imagining that Prince William was going to choose that as his favourite haunt. So clearly we had good tastes. But one of the things we did quite often say was somebody should do the 1690s Privy Council, because it's the obvious gap. It's the thing that the earlier people working in this area just never quite got round to doing. At the conclusion of RPS, there was quite a lot of sadness. You know, it's been a good 10 years. We've all been together, been working on this, and it's been nice. We've got to know one another. We've done something important. But the survivors, and I think the survivors were probably by then Gillian and Alison largely, I think had enough. You get to a certain point where you don't want to see another of these damn records that has to be checked and transcribed and translated. So it was a massive surprise when Alastair told me that they were going to do this. And I thought, well, brave man, but there were two immediate thoughts. One, they're bonkers. Why would you want to inflict yet more pain on yourself, given that we'd gone through 10 years of it? And the other one, to be quite honest, was they'll never get money. I really did not think this would get funded. And when Alastair said they'd applied to Leverhulme, I thought they'll definitely not get the money. I mean, I knew the chair of the Leverhulme Trust at the time, and I know the kind of things that they funded, and it wasn't projects like this. So it's a fantastic tribute to Alastair and the rest of you involved in putting forward that application that you got it, because it was against all the odds. I mean, yes, I wrote a reference, but I was writing it not expecting it to be funded. And of course, this came through just as Alastair's packing his bags for retirement, and COVID's just coming around the corner. So I think you launched it between the two lockdowns. So the omens, as the Romans would have said, were not particularly good if you think about what had to be done in the time in which it was done. So Alastair said, would you just say something about running projects? And I'll just toss out a few things here. In a sense, they're no different. History projects are no different from any other projects. And given the kind of career I've had, I've done all sorts of different projects. But you have to start with something that's manageable. Can you do this? There's very, very few people like Cortes and Pizarro that get to conquer an entire empire with a couple of men and a few horses. Mostly you have to plan what it is you're going to do. When we did the Scottish Parliament project, there was no plan. It was 2 sheets of A4, a conversation with the Secretary of State, £500,000 and off you go. And we hadn't a clue what we were doing. And Alan and I, right at the start, sort of looked at one another and thought, well, what now? What do you know about Parliament? I don't know much. So I assume that having learned from that, you had a plan and you stuck to it. But it was a manageable one. You had something that was containable and deliverable. And that's right. It's the same for a PhD, isn't it? If somebody comes in and says they're going to do a PhD in Scottish kingship, we'd show them the door. The second thing is get enough money and get it at the start, because getting it later on is harder, as we found. We in the end spent 2.5 times as much as we got the first time round. Appoint the right people. And if you think of a football team, you don't appoint a team full of strikers or a team full of goalkeepers. And you don't want a team full of prima donnas on a project. That just isn't going to work. You want people, yeah, who've got intellectual abilities. You want the people who've got the skill set, technical skill set in some cases, whether it's Latin or paleography or whatever. But you really need team players. If you don't have team players, the project is not going to work. And you're going to have to accept that some of your team will leave. That's the nature of these, because they'll be in temporary contracts. And you mustn't think of that as negative. It's good when your people get taken and given jobs elsewhere. That's really good. Alan was one of 3 people in the course of 2 years on the project that I had in Manchester on Scottish migration to England. The project got done. It's fine. These things can be managed, and it's good. It's good for careers. Expect something to go wrong. It will, again and again and again. Of course, it will. But you can get on with it, and really importantly, have fun. These things are good fun. But they're hard times, but they're also great. You bond and you do things well and you do something worthwhile. The benefit of project work, I did a talk at the British Academy about this some while ago, 10 years ago, and they weren't very receptive to it, but I think things are changing. I think it's the best environment for PhD students to be on a project. We get a lot of mental health issues with PhD students now, as you know, and a lot of that comes from just the loneliness of working. in a very sort of on your own sort of way. Being part of a team, and a mixed team of professors and lecturers and postdocs and PhDs, just like scientists do, it's a far better environment for training people than setting somebody off on their own, as I was, and most of you probably were. It's a much healthier approach. And teamwork is not just good for the project, it's good for the individuals who are on it. Most PhD students won't become academics. They'll go out into the world and do some other sort of job where they'll have to be in a team. And actually, if you're going to be an academic too, it's important to be a team player. One of the problems, as any of you who've been head of a department will know, is academic departments are full of selfish, egotistical and narcissistic people who don't want to help. They just want to get on with their own stuff. But being in a team actually encourages a different kind of approach to working. Anyway, what's this project giving us? Well, firstly, we alluded to it already, it's filling a gap. That's important. It's not important for writing a monograph. I'm doing this kind because it's never been done. But it's quite important when it comes to big records collections that the gaps are filled. And a big gap has been filled here. So somebody can do the next gap, court of session records. There's a massive gap that will take a century to complete. But that's the way these things are built up. Secondly, it shines a light on a very, very important episode or period in British history, and that's there in your objectives. It's on the website. You all know this because you work in this area. The wrapping up of the revolution, the origins of the Jacobites, the Glencoe and the Highland War, the famine, Darien, the Union. These are all big topics in British history. They're absolutely pivotal to the creation of the British state. They resonate down through the centuries. Half the population almost still votes on the basis of what happened in 1707. So these matter. And it will make a difference to our understanding of government, of politics, of social control. And then there's the nature of the project. Because it's digitized and searchable, that also allows you to be playful. That seems an odd thing for me to say, maybe. I'm not known for being playful. Well, outside the office, maybe. But it's true. I mean, I remember having a conversation with a Nobel Prize winner in Shanghai a few years ago. And he was telling me they won the Nobel Prize from something that started off with messing about in the lab. Messing about. It's these, you get these research dating exercises these days, or sandpits is another weird one they've come up with. It just used to be called the pub, but it's basically just sitting down and having a natter and eventually deciding that, oh, this is fun, let's do this. But you can do it with this kind of medium in a way that's a bit different, because you can frame questions and get quick answers that set you off thinking, well, that's weird. Does it mean anything? Why is it when you search for Crail, you get 4 results? When you search for Rare, you get 22, and you search for Haddington, you get 28. Does that mean anything? I have no idea if it means anything at all, but it's kind of interesting. Or if you put in horses, you get 164, sheep 34, cattle 14, and pigs 0. Why is the Privy Council more interested in horses than cattle? Presumably it's something to do with the military situation at the time, but you'd have thought cattle, one of the most important exports in the country, would have figured more. As for pigs, nobody cares, obviously. But there we are. You can play these sorts of games, and the more the database can be used to search multiple variants at any one time, the better. And it took me 15 minutes last night, while sort of having an eye on the Champions League and drinking some whiskey, to look at the way the council itself works. If you search for formation of new committees, you get 159 results. So in 16 years, 159 committees were set up. What the hell were these things doing? I don't know. Maybe it was the same committee that was set up 159 times. I don't know. But it's kind of interesting. So you play about and you get something that might mean something. And then I had a look at the fact that there were 73 meetings of the council in 1695, 65 in 1700, but only 41 in 1706. Probably because they're trying to get the union through the parliament. So, okay, let's look at what's happening while the parliament's sitting between October and December of 1706. They're actually doing nothing. You actually look at what they're doing in those meetings. Apart from the riots in Galloway and Glasgow and Edinburgh in November or thereabouts, they're doing nothing. Why is that? Because there's no management bandwidth. These guys are just absolutely absorbed by what's going on in the Parliament, that nothing's happening in the executive part of the government. So who's doing that? Where's all the stuff that's normally happening 5 days a week or whatever it is in the Privy Council? That's just been dropped. Just exactly what me and my colleagues did during COVID. We just dropped all the ordinary stuff because you've got this to deal with. Again, you couldn't do that very quickly or easily from manuscript base, but you can do it with this. So anyway, that's just me fooling around on an evening while the Champions League's going on in the background. Somebody serious will do some serious work with this, is the point. So anyway, to conclude, the Privy Council project here at Stirling and Dundee has done a great job, really great job. Just in the few days I have played with it, that is clear. And I hope they've avoided all the crazy, stupid mistakes we made on the Parliament project, particularly around having a custom-built IT system running underneath it. And everybody who works in this area and everybody who follows over the next century will thank them for it, even once the names get sort of semi-forgotten. In the same way as we say, who was that guy Bain working on the calendar of state papers? Nevertheless, there's a huge debt. People sometimes think that working on records is dull and unimaginative. In my younger days, I did think that actually it's kind of arrogant. But it's really, really important to do it. And a lot of the so-called 4-star articles and books, monographs that are lauded these days will be forgotten pretty quickly, I can assure you. This kind of work will not be forgotten. It really does endure. It really is important. So to Alastair and Alan, and both Allans and anybody else here who's part of that project, a big thank you on behalf of the entire Scottish history community or British history community who work in this area. You've done a great job. Thank you and congratulations.
Thanks very much indeed, Keith, for some very kind, generous and fitting words. Next on the agenda, and I'm delighted to introduce him, is the man behind the project himself, Alastair, who, I mean, in the context of this project, needs no introduction. So over to you, Alastair, to take us into the next bit of this evening. I'm sure you've got lots of excellent stories to share.
Thank you, Alan. All right. Yeah, I'm not sure if the video is showing up for our online participants. Is the issue? I wonder if we could get someone online to confirm. Can you see the video for those attending online? Can you see video of our speakers? Callum, someone thumbs up? Oh, they can't see the speakers. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Welcome to you all today. We have a little bit of a clash today with another event in Edinburgh, but as the Bard said, we happy few. The research work of the Scottish Privy Council project has taken to new levels what we already knew, I think. The central place of the council in the political, religious, economic and social life of the Scottish people before it was abolished 300 years ago. Meeting in days a week rather than a couple of months a year like the Scottish Parliament, it was indeed the executive branch of government. And though it is a little clumsy to compare it to the modern day cabinet, it is a reasonable shorthand, and that will do us today. But I won't talk to you about the history, in spite of it being a dynamic period of revolution, religious hiatus, economic collapse, and parliamentary union with England. Instead, it falls on me to say a few words about the background to the project itself, its journey and its conclusion, which we are here today to celebrate, of course. Thank you very much, Keith, for what you've said, and Alan. In other words, those non-historians here today don't need to worry. So, wow, how do we get to this point? It's astonishing. Like all research projects, I guess, it has at times seemed unlikely. Like all successful projects, the unraveling story is a mixture of perseverance, a word that Alan mentioned, and good fortune. Simple as that. Thanks also to Keith for his warm words. Keith has to take much of the blame as well as the credit for what you've achieved with the Scottish Privy Council project. Let me explain. Firstly, when I seemed destined to be a 19th century Scottish historian, Keith's special subject on the reign of James VI came into view and propelled me into being an early modern historian. I'm glad to hear that Ali Cathcart has reactivated this module at Stirling, by the way, which is good news indeed. Secondly, while being perfectly open and declaring that he knew very little about the early modern Scottish press, he was prepared to supervise my PhD as I fell back to a degree on my professional experience of the modern book trade. In the process of that research, I realised the vital role that the Privy Council had in managing the regulatory triumvirate of the book trade, censorship, copyright, and licensing. Then thirdly, following his brilliantly timed and successfully petitioning of the UK government of John Major, he managed to obtain substantial funding for the Scottish Parliament project to digitise the records of the Scottish Parliament from the 1230s to 1707. And I was fortunate, of course, to get a research fellowship at St Andrews attached to the project from 1998 to 2005, with a one-year teaching fellowship at Stirling 2003-04 in the middle. And naturally, work continued on the Parliament project after funding expired, and after I returned to Stirling on a permanent basis in 2005. Eventually, the records, if I get this right, others will accuse me of getting this wrong, the records of Scotland Parliament 277, or RPS as we call it, was soft launched in 2007 and finally launched in 2008. I well remember the party at Holyrood with all the TV screens around about with the records. We can only have one screen here today, and Nicola Sturgeon delivering a rather short speech wearing one of our classic pink suits. Since then, I've been attracted to the idea of managing a large research project when other people do all the work. You know, chairing meetings and watching others graft away. And I suspect Keith would admit that he was really at the coalface during much of the project. But RPS, with 16 million words, was created by over 30 people over 10 years. And our smaller project, 3 years, and eventually 6 million words, has had 8 people over 4 years. All of us, including yourself, yours truly, have had to muck in. The story of trying to get funding to create the new online edition of the Scottish Privy Council record goes back to my PhD research in the 1990s. As the historians amongst you know, the printed edition of the Council registers from 1545 to 1691 were published in the 19th and 20th centuries, the last volume appearing the 1691 one in 1971. And it became clear to me that one of the reasons why, in relative terms, little research has been carried out on the Council from 1692 to its abolition in 1708 was the lack of an easily accessible record. Working with the manuscript registers was possible, of course, and even a pleasure. But in an age before mobile phones, to take images, it was frustrating and time-consuming work. However, I discovered around 2008 that typescripts of these last decades existed and created in the 1960s and stashed in uncatalogued boxes under the desks of a number of National Records of Scotland staff, the NRS as we call it, of course. These were foundations for new printed editions taking us up to 1708, but for lack of funds, the project was abandoned. So I spent the next decade boring colleagues, including some here today, about the prospects of publishing an online edition, which, like RPS, could use scanned text to create a base record. I surveyed the existing records held by the NRS and also got a couple of postgraduates to carry out other surveys, including Laura Rayner, of course, whose work we've all built upon. In 2017, I had lengthy negotiations with the NRS with a view to them partnering a Stirling grant application, but they got cold feet, being, in their words, unaccustomed to such applications. It's a shame. And it was at this point that Allan MacDonald at Dundee effectively rode to the rescue, enabling us to make a joint application. And then we have to ask ourselves, of course, why the Leverhulme Trust? Those who make applications for Leverhulme grants know that one of the elements you have to explain is the suitability of Leverhulme as a funding body for your project. I was actually advised in Stirling, as well as by yourself, Professor Brown, not to apply to Leverhulme because they don't often fund digital humanities. You were wrong. Two reasons attracted us to Leverhulme. One, and excludes any people with Irish relatives at this point, no feckin' feck, the Byzantine full economic costing system, which haunts all projects and overcomplicates everything. Instead, merely teaching buyouts for staff, fellowship salaries, and non-staff costs. Secondly, direct funding for PhD students, and Alan and I were especially keen on this. Of course, have been so successful thanks to the candidates. So, we came through the online application process in late 2018, full application in summer 2019, and were awarded the grant in November 19, a 3-year grant for approaching $500,000, won hilariously 3 years after I attempted to retire. Allan Kennedy was to be project manager, a task he has excelled at. 2 research fellowships would be on 2-year contracts, along with 2 3-year PhD studentships. The fellows and postgrads were recruited through 2 very competitive and highly successful processes. I note that philosophy at Stirling have been awarded a very large Leverhulme grant, and I have to feel that our success will have been no hindrance to that. Then COVID hit us in early 2020, of course. Our advisory board consisted of John Young, Mr. Clyde, Karen Bowie, Glasgow, Laura Stewart, York, and Amy Blakeway, St Andrews, all very engaged and encouraging, regularly congratulating us for keeping the show on the road in spite of COVID. But it did have its impact. The problem was the closure of the NRS, of course, where the Privy Council manuscript material is housed. Our 2 PhD students, Robbie and Susanne Weston, were due to start at the spring of 2020 intake, but that was delayed until the autumn. Meanwhile, the 2 research fellows, Clare Loughlin and Laura Doak, were due to start in spring 21, but did not do so until August. It must have been stressful for all of them to wait, but thankfully they did, and Alan and I certainly agree they've done fantastically well. Clare and Laura in transcribing the record and editing the new manuscript edition, and Robbie and Suzanne for doing excellent and inspiring research, as well as calendaring the miscellaneous material that appears on our website. Also, because of COVID, Leverhulme allowed us a no-cost extension of 4 months to the end of 2023, so the development of the website could be completed, and a concluding conference held at Stirling in the autumn. And in spite of COVID, we were able to get the project underway, started in some respects, even before the recruitment phase. Firstly, the NRS supplied us with digitized images of the 1960s transcripts. These were provided without cost as a contribution to the project, for which we are very grateful. These digitizations were optical character recognition, or OCR, scanned by an Edinburgh scanner with experience of historical documents, who was commissioned by Derek Albenston, an experienced print farmer based in Oxford, who I've known since my years working in publishing. This generated word files, which was subsequently proofread by the scanner, Senga Fairgrave. Neither are here today in person, unfortunately, but I thank them both. Laura and Clare used these scanned texts as a term of reference when they produced their own transcriptions for the manuscript record. Secondly, and some of you in the room might not agree with this, but the NRS must be thanked for allowing us greater access than many researchers experience as archives opened and closed intermittently during the pandemic. Our project team were allocated their own desk to avoid the booking issues experienced by others. I spent a lot of time telling my colleagues not to talk about this because others might have been resentful, but it was fantastic. By August 23, when their contracts ended, Laura and Clare completed compiling the edited manuscript texts of the Acta and Decreta Privy Council Register, the two types of record on the website, which broadly reflect public and private business, although that is a generalization. They've done a tremendous job presenting texts in form, classification, and referencing style as agreed by the project team. Meeting after meeting took place to agree these style questions, and there were numerous drafts, but we got there, I think. Messaging each other when problems arose were very productive and often better than storing up queries for some giant meeting. Although sometimes I deployed a casting vote, which I'm sure some people weren't always happy with. The edited manuscript text we have called Stage 2. Stage 1 being the laborious transcription work completed by Laura and Clare in the winter of 2022-3. Stage 1 was a warts and all exercise with idiosyncrasies, gaps, and clerical gaffes noted in pop-ups, like wrong years, indicating that the registers were sometimes written up long after the business took place. But being a 17th century clerk was not an easy job, so we should feel for them. I remember that some years ago, I was looking at the borough records for Glasgow, and in a large folio volume, I turned over a leaf. I was presented by two blank pages, and in the gutter in the centre was a large ink blot, and beside it, written in the classically incomprehensible clerical handwriting that Glasgow used in the Restoration period, were two simple words: "Oh shit." Now, I burst out laughing. You can imagine how the minders in the archive reacted to that. I got a yellow card. Anyway, the two Allans and I have begun Stage 3, the process of translating the manuscript text into modernized form for better computer searching. But this will be added to over the coming months and years, and is a task that isn't finished yet. This aspect with parallel text is but one example where we've used RPS as a template, the Records of the Parliament of Scotland. But in terms of the functionality of the website, which I'll leave to Allan Kennedy to demonstrate later, it's not always been possible to reproduce its unique features, including some aspects of the search facility due to the limitations of WordPress. Technological change can have its impact, particularly on long projects, of course. The original plan was to publish RPS as a CD-ROM. I might ask you all, raise your hand if you've ever heard of a CD-ROM. Some in this room won't know what that means. And with the advent of the internet, clearly with RPS, we move to a website, of course. But RPS has not really proved very comfortable with mobile phones. I don't know if you've ever tried to use it. It's tricky. This website, this new website, has been designed from the onset for mobile phone use, and even I can work it. So you can too. Lever rooms show a flexible attitude to project schedules due to COVID, of course, but also over how money is spent across the project. Not the total, of course, can't go beyond that, but within it. there are several points to make that may help others in the future applying for grants I'd like to make on that. For example, we allocated a large budget for travelling to meet the quarterly project meetings. Pandemic, leading us to use Teams regularly, meant that this fund was underspent. When we got into the long grass of the record, we came across more Latin than we expected. Therefore, we commissioned Isla Williamson to transcribe Latin and produce translations, which will be added to as the translation record work proceeds, of course. This was not in the original budget, so we use unspent money for that. And thank you, Isla, for your work. It was fantastic. Also, thank you for the list of typos that you found on the website, which have all been changed, to be pleased to know. I did it as soon as I read it, but I do. Thank you. And also, the greater use of photography of our mobile phones reduced imaging costs, but provided more funding for conference attendance and building intellectual exchange, which included panels in Liverpool, Athens, immediately remotely, Paris and Rome. We were touring capitals for the International Commission for the History of Parliamentary and Representative Institutions, which is ICHRPI, which is easier to say. And that is a major government historical association that looks into government of all sorts, and those panels went extremely well. Meanwhile, in terms of the budget total, Leverhulme expect the annual reports and the end project report to be precise. And this can be a trying process across the partner institutions, and I can only imagine what having 3 partners might be like in this kind of case, and their respective research finance offices. Certainly, cross-charging across 2 universities can be problematic. One time, somewhat hilariously, Dundee's automatic invoice system threatened Stirling with the bailiffs if they weren't paid one of their invoices charged to the project grant. I've got this. If we ever write the history of this project, I've got this as evidence. It's absolutely hilarious. I was tempted to send it to the principal, but I didn't. Although the Privy Council project concludes with the resource website, which much work on testing and drafting, designs took place in 2022 and 2023. At the end of 23, in the last few months of the project funding, a major push was made to firm up the appearance and functionality of the website. A freelance web designer, Ronnie Fisher, commissioned by Stirling Information Services, came up with a foundational layout and design, but left the project in the summer of 23. Another freelancer, Sandy Kirchner-Wilson, took on the job of completing the development of the website. Meanwhile, Stirling's Philip Ward came up with an automated system of tagging records in WordPress, which eliminated the need to tag manually thousands of records. We did this year by year, checking the records for glitches as we went. I paused because this was a game changer. And if we're honest, it saved the project. Phil will forever be on my virtual Christmas card list with his disarming, "that's no problem" attitude. Thank you, Phil. He even managed to train Alan and myself on how to edit a record in WordPress. No mean feat in my case, given my natural phobia over technology. Looking to the future, legacy data security and archiving must also be a concern. We all know that RPS, hosted by the National Records of Scotland, of course, has recently gone down. And we all panicked, thinking it's gone. It's back up again. It is a worry. Nonetheless, the plan is to transfer the Privy Council website to the NRS in, say, 5 years' time, to be part of Scotland's people, their genealogical gateway. This will not be done to me. But I imagine that around the point of completing the translation work, Allan from Dundee and representatives from History at Stirling will pull together a memorandum of understanding with the NRS on the transfer, with assurances about free access, such as was obtained for RPS. There's always a concern in that they charge for stuff on Scotland's people, and we don't want them to charge people for getting access to our website. One thing is clear from this introduction, and that is the importance of teamwork, and what a team the project has had. It has been a personal pleasure of mine to manage and work with Alan, Clare, Laura, Robbie, and Suzanne. Typical of our positive story is that Robbie successfully defended his PhD just last week. Dr. Tree. Doesn't that sound great? Eh? Fabulous. It's entitled Jura Majestatis, or the Rights of Sovereignty, the Privy Council and Government Administration in Scotland, 1689 to 1708. Suzanne's thesis, entitled The Privy Council, Social Order and Everyday Government in Scotland, 1689 to 1708, is progressing well. More is to come, including an Edinburgh University Press volume of essays on the council due out next year. The chapters with the council at the centre reflect the interests of the project team, but also are to be found in publications elsewhere. Allan MacDonald on the council and its relationship with local government and environmental policy. Allan Kennedy on the council as a court and its relationship to other criminal and civil courts in Scotland. Loughlin and the council's policies over religious minorities. Laura Doak on the materialism or physical construction of the council records and the council's image and relationship to popular society. Robbie Tree on council management of elections, its policy of the established church, and more recently, I think, its role on regulating coal mining. Susanne Weston on marginal groups, including women and racial groupings, and myself looking at its relationship to the Scottish Parliament and the politics leading to the abolition of the council in 1708. Guest authors to the EUP collection include John Young, Julian MacDonald, Derek Patrick, Graham Millen. In short, this project has had a long neck and will have a long tail. To conclude, at an even more personal level, the symmetry of the last 2 decades is quite striking for me. Allan Kennedy, my first PhD student, started in 2008 when I first began to explore online publication of the Privy Council record. And my last PhD student, Robbie Tree, completed his PhD in the very week, virtually, that the website was launched. However, my wife Leslie is here today. In part, she joked to witness with her own eyes the end of my involvement in this online part of the project. And in the words of the late football commentator Kenneth Wolstenholme, they think it's all over now. It is now. Well, almost. Thank you.